Ooh, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how you doing? How's your mama? How's your family? We back. Like I said, no green screen in the last video. No green screen. We on vacation. Videos ain't stopping though. We got TJ Love's fights. How wrestling has surpassed striking in the UFC. We're seeing today, dominant wrestling. Dominant. Dominant wrestling beats dominant striking. It just does. And now we got TJ Love's fights. Gonna tell us how wrestling surpassed striking. Now, we used to be a lot of the champions now, if you look at it, it used to be guys who could defend a takedown. As long as you could defend a takedown, keep it on the feet, you could strike, you could win. We're not seeing that anymore. Except for Alex Pieta. I want to say every single other champion is not that style anymore. Ilya, you can say it's that style, but Ilya will go also out there and secure his own takedowns. Ilya can grapple. You got Islam Makhachev. You got Merab Dvalishvili. You got Bilal Muhammad. You got DDP. Then you get Pereira. Then you get John Jones. All the champions wrestle. And they're dominant whenever they want to do it. So, truly believe that's the way the UFC's going. I'm going to sit back. Let TJ take it away. React. How come I can do it?
Pure strikers might actually be done for. It's funny because just 8 months ago, I did a video about 5 of the 8 UFC champions at the time being primarily strikers or having a striking base.
Pantoja, I'm sorry.
Really only say 2 of the current 8 male champions are primarily
Can't
strikers.
Even count Ilya.
And Ilya Topuria comes from a heavy jiu-jitsu and Greco-Roman base. And the reason why he can box so freely without giving a fuck is that he knows he can defend anything that comes to him. Truly, the only pure striker we have left on the top is
and he's
Alex
only fighting
Pereira. And that's really because he hasn't had to fight anybody with solid wrestling pedigree yet at 205 or really at all in his UFC career. I had a theory in that video for why a majority of strikers were champions at that time, and I basically said that strikers more often get the title shot because they're more exciting and more fan favorites, so that's why there are more strikers on top. And guys like Bilal and Merab, despite being on monster win streaks, had to sit back because their style was a little more boring, but eventually they would get their shot and win. And it seems like that theory is being proven right. UFC 306 last week, Merab finally gets his shot at Sean O'Malley after a 10-fight win streak, shuts down Sean for all 5 rounds, and gets the belt he so deserves. UFC 305, Dricus du Plessis, though we don't think of him as a wrestler, has the highest takedown average by a mile in comparison to the top 5 ranked middleweights.
He's a dominant wrestler. If he wants to get the fight to the ground,
and of course, because
he's most likely going to drag you to the ground.
Of his barbaric power, he took down one of the best strikers in Israel Adesanya many times in this fight before ultimately ending it on the ground.
Prime example
UFC
right there,
304, the GOAT, Bilal Muhammad, finally gets his shot at Leon Edwards after a 9-fight no-loss streak and completely pummels Leon Edwards, giving him no room to rest and even came at him with Canelo-like boxing. Skipping over UFC 303, of course, at UFC 302, this time we see the wrestler defend their belt against a striker, keep up with the stand-up, and eventually get this fight to the ground and get the submission. These last UFC events have completely shifted the champions to the wrestlers' favor, and it looks like the elite strikers of the UFC have clearly been surpassed by the elite wrestlers of the UFC, which has truly solidified the long-held theory that wrestling is the best base for fighting.
They saying every fight starts on the feet. Yeah, that's cool until I drag you down against your will.
There's a couple hows. How big is the gap between strikers and wrestlers? How did the best wrestlers surpass the best strikers? And most importantly, how does this meta shift in style affect what is needed to become a champion in the future? But speaking of champions and gold especially, even though I'm not fighting, I'm strapped up with gold like a champion.
I like how you did that. See, I finally get YouTube Premiums because I'm tired of y'all watching these ads. And then he sneak it in like that on me, TJ. That was smooth. Gotta pay them bills. That was smooth. But we gonna go ahead and... Damn, TJ, come on, TJ. All right, we gonna come right here. Come on, TJ. Hey.
Your purchase store-wide. So let's look at some numbers. So I have some code here to see how statistically wrestlers have been doing against strikers. As you may know, I've been working on this machine learning model, and so of course I have the stats of every UFC fight ever. But I would say the phenomenon of dominant wrestlers taking over started when Khabib beat Conor. So let's take a subset of this data from that date all the way up until now. So we have the data of the fights from the last 6 years-ish. Cool. So now the next step is defining what a wrestler is and what a striker is. We all know Merab Dvalishvili, Islam Makhachev, Bilal Muhammad are wrestlers, and we know that Sean O'Malley, Dustin Poirier, and Leon Edwards are strikers, but how can we label them as such? I can't go through the 4,252 UFC fighters that have ever fought and label them manually, right? I'm a busy boy, so what I will do is try to label each fighter by some sort of statistic and call them a wrestler if they pass a certain threshold and a striker if not. Of course, this isn't perfect, as the threshold I pick is subjective and not all fighters are purely wrestlers or purely strikers, but for the sake of the video, everyone is going to be binarily labeled as a striker or a wrestler. Also, the stat I picked for labeling is quite subjective, but what I found is that takedown average actually turns out to be a great indicator for whether a guy is a wrestler or not. Just briefly going through the fighters that many would think are wrestlers and many would think are strikers, it seems like guys that average more than 2-ish takedowns per 15 minutes are wrestlers, so let's say 2.5 for now. 2.5. So after labeling everyone as either a wrestler or a striker and found all the fights where a wrestler by our definition
then you got some
striker,
wrestlers who suck at securing takedowns, but all they do is shoot. So it is going to be hard to.
I then found the percentage of how often the wrestler won, which came out to 59% of the time. But since my label of wrestler was very subjective and based on takedown average, I wanted to test this with different values, and as shown, as the takedown average increases, so does the win rate of the so-called wrestler versus the striker. And yeah, we got exactly what we expected, peaking at around 66% of the time. The wrestler beats the striker more often as the
I don't know if y'all can hear that, but it's going
takedown average is increased, and we define wrestler as being above that takedown average, and we define striker as below that takedown average.
Really cool model
and I'm no data scientist, I'm just a software engineer, so I probably did a couple things wrong here, and we could have also defined wrestler better, maybe using a striking stat or other stats, so there's probably a better way to do this, but we do know that wrestling pretty much beats out striking most of the time. So of course that leads to the next question as to why these numbers are the way they are, and why at the highest level it seems like dominant wrestlers can defeat practically all of even the best strikers. It seems like every one of these fights, the striker puts up a subpar performance, can't defend the takedown. They even get outstruck by the wrestler at times. And the comment section is quick to say the striker didn't look their best. But I honestly think at these guys' best,
I think it's because the wrestler makes them not look their best. Because the wrestler's imposing their will, not letting them let their hands go because they have to be ready to sprawl and defend the double leg or the single leg or the clinch. While me, I'm the one in control, so I'm gonna let them go. I'm gonna let my hands go. That's what makes them not look their best. They were their best. They just couldn't do what they wanted to do.
Cannot compete with dominant wrestlers. I mean, think about it stylistically. Despite both guys starting on the feet, it seems like it's easier for a wrestler to take the striker down to their world in comparison to a striker keeping the fight in theirs. A wrestler is really only thinking about one thing: the entry. The punches and kicks are all secondary.
Look at that shot, bro. O'Malley was nowhere. Come on, bro. It's too late at that point. Where are your hands? Feed them some hips. Come on.
The punches and kicks are all secondary. A wrestler is really looking for just one window of time where they can shoot and take this fight to the ground, and from there it's a complete mismatch. For a striker, they have to play this balancing act between anticipating a takedown and striking enough to win the round. Because the striker is so preoccupied mentally because of the threat of the takedown, this leads to openings for the wrestler to strike well. Wrestlers can often just win the stand-up solely through the threat of the takedown. The threat of the takedown mixed with the pressure of striking these wrestlers can give out leads to strikers looking completely frozen. If they open up to strike, they often get timed, and if they sit there to anticipate a shot, they're going to get pressured
his
most
lip is
often with boxing. So again, you end up with strikers not really knowing what to do, and it's not because they're not their usual self or they're not their best self. Stylistically, they're just kind of fucked. And the only real way a pure striker can win is finding that one opening.
The kill shot.
Really hard when Bilal is in your face with the best boxing you've ever seen, or when Merab is constantly coming at you while not breaking a sweat because he has a third lung. So what does this mean for the UFC going forward? A lot of people were anticipating these boring wrestlers, quote unquote, were going to take over.
Why are you making Bilal?
It was just a matter of time for these guys to get their title shot. I talked about this briefly in this video, but Dana will always try to get the fan favorites towards the top, and strikers are more often than not the fan favorites.
Is not even a fan favorite.
This is mixed martial arts, but
he's not. He's not. He doesn't sell pay-per-views.
Fans want to see knockouts over 5-round grind-em-out decisions.
Look up what him and Jorge Masvidal sold.
But sooner or later, the wrestlers become undeniable. They go on monster 9-fight or 10-fight win streaks, and it gets to a point where they have to get a title shot, and that's where they finally show the stylistic nightmare they present to the striking champion. With now a vast majority of the guys on top having wrestling, or at the very least a great grappling base, I think we're finally seeing the shift in style for what it takes to be a champion and stay there. I think this new generation of champions and top fighters in general need to have a good wrestling foundation. A lot of pure striking champions could get away with not having the best wrestling or grappling because their division just didn't have dominant wrestlers at the time, or they just weren't facing them because strikers are more often to get the shot at the belt than the so-called boring wrestlers. And now that we're seeing a new generation of fighters with great wrestling enter each division, it's going to be hard for pure strikers to avoid these guys and even harder for them to find that perfect shot. I really think the age of Sean O'Malley's, Israel Adesanya's, Leon Edwards, and it pains me to say this, but Alex Pereira's will soon die out. We had our fun with the champs that were exclusively strikers, but this was going to come eventually. I think the striking we're going to see,
I don't think Pereira loses to a grappler until he moves up to heavyweight, though.
Going to look like the striking from Islam Makhachev, Ilia Topuria, or even Diego Lopez. Guys with a more wrestling or grappling background that are confident in their grappling abilities, which in turn leads them to striking freely, which is in sharp contrast to the striking we see from Sean O'Malley or Leon Edwards, a form of striking that's constantly concerned of the takedown. But I don't think all the champions are going to be quote-unquote crotch-sniffing 5-round decision wrestlers. Eventually, someone with a great grappling base that is able to counter the wrestling from a pure wrestler and on top of that has great striking will eventually topple these guys over. And so a new generation of fighters and champions will begin, one where a grappling base is not a nice to have but is needed to be on top, and to be really championship material, you need great striking on top of that too, which is in my opinion something a guy with a
one of my favorite videos from me, TJ.
This
is a great video.
Striking is much more intuitive. But in any case, I think the champions in the future with a pure striking base is going to be damn near impossible with how good the grappling has become and how good wrestlers can get at striking these days. We're clearly seeing a shift in style for champions and a new era of champion emerging. This is the new meta. But of course, what do you guys think about this new meta change? Will we ever see pure striking go back on top, or will all of the champions just have great wrestling background and make it damn near impossible for a pure striker to be on top?
You don't gotta go downstairs.
But again, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
That was a good video, TJ. Like, comment, subscribe. Share this to somebody, man. Don't be stingy. Don't be stingy. You ain't got a home, but you gotta get up out of here, man. Yeet. Come on, mama. Mama D.